what awaits me there.
Say what waits for us all, Patrick.
We are talking Haunting of Bloody Tower, also known as The Haunting of the Tower of London. Now this is directed, produced, written and edited by Charlie Steeds. Steeds is a prolific kind of horror B-movie film creative here in the UK. And there seems to be a fair amount of people like that in the UK making low budget indie horror, exploitation, action B-movies, things like this, that you'll kind of see going straight to DVD on the local kind of supermarket shelves and things like this, or straight to kind of VOD. And I've mentioned, we've reviewed a few of them on the channel by various kind of filmmakers with films both from the UK and the States. But Charlie Steeds' work, I have to say, for the most part, I've somewhat enjoyed, and I would say is arguably his hit rate has been a step up from a lot of the kind of the lower budget fare that we kind of watch on the channel from certain kind of film companies who I'm not going to kind of point out, but you probably know what I'm talking about if you've watched the channel for any length of time. Anyway, so how does this one fare? So I actually did a trailer reaction for this a little while ago. And so I've now just watched kind of the full film. So let me give you a brief plot synopsis. It really focuses on two lead characters. We have a young priest who is serving, in the Tower of London, who is obviously a devout religious, although he may have a little bit of a kind of a dark secret himself. And then we have this spirit medium who is able to contact the dead and is very much fearful of his gifts, because he sees the kind of what it means to truly have this afterlife, and it isn't the kind of the bright, sunny kind of heavenly visions people might expect. Anyway, these two kind of get embroiled in this plot where there has been a murder of the two young boy princes of England, and the king is he's ill. He can't really kind of do anything. He's kind of bedridden. And the Queen is, distraught with grief. So these two individuals, this priest and this spirit medium, to kind of put aside their differences and see if they can kind of figure out what has happened. Now the movie plays a little bit like the Sean Connery film, The Name of the Rose, I think it's called. And it's a little bit like that, but with much more overt kind of supernatural stuff kind of going on. So let's talk about what I think works in this movie. Now, I will have to preface this by saying this is a low-budget B movie, so I'm going to be reviewing this in the context of a low-budget movie, because you can't really compare this to a standard blockbuster with most of them, but it's worth pointing it out. Now, to me, this has one real big kind of like feather in its cap. I'm going to save that as the final thing that I think I'm going to talk about here in regards to the positives. But so we'll save that one for now. But let's kind of maybe talk about some others. I think this has a reasonably intricate plot for a start. I was when I was watching this, it's kind of like somewhat of a a mystery. Who has done it? Who is responsible for these kind of princes? And it seems like it's going to be relatively kind of obvious maybe where it's going. But I have to say, and I'm pleased to say, the movie actually has a little bit more plot than you may initially think, and that's quite good. And I appreciate it, certainly from a lower budget B movie, because quite often these movies are made cheap, kind of to get out pretty quickly, and not a lot of thought is put behind them. So I appreciate the fact this one has a little bit more in regards to its plot and a few kind of twists and turns. So the actual plot wise was pretty good. I actually quite enjoyed the relationship but between our two main characters, this priest, who is obviously a man of God, and he really doesn't like the fact that he has to kind of team up with a guy who is a medium, a spirit medium, because he feels this is like an ungodly act, and he has to kind of wrestle with his own faith in order to do that. And conversely, this kind of medium, the way he thinks about it is like, well, God doesn't exist because I've seen the afterlife, and these two people are at odds. And I thought that was handled in a way where it doesn't feel like a forced argument. These are just two people who kind of are, broadly speaking, trying to kind of find a common ground in regards to what they need to do, but they have these kind of quite opposing kind of ideologies about their kind of view of faith and kind of and religion and stuff like this, which I thought was all good. And I would say those two characters as well, the actors that portrayed them, I think probably did the best job in the movie. I thought that both those actors, I mean, it's not Oscar worthy, don't get me wrong, but I thought they did a pretty good job here, for the most part, the majority of the scenes at least, making kind of believable characters who you felt had kind of depth and, you know, believability to them. The movie is fairly gory, if I'm honest, more than I was expecting. I mean, maybe you kind of expect it being called, you know, the Tower of London, the Bloody Tower, whatever it is, the kind of the variant names are of this movie. But yeah, it's pretty gory, and it's all kind of practical effects, and there are some fairly kind of decent kind of effects worked here, you know, practical models, makeup, and things like that, which I kind of quite enjoyed, and. The kind of the location shooting, albeit it's clearly obviously not the Tower of London, nonetheless we have a few external shots, and I wonder if this was the same castle that Steve's used in his other movie, Werewolf Castle, because there's a lot of the same cast. You know, it does make for a kind of a fun medieval kind of backdrop to this kind of this horror movie. And then the other thing I wanted to say, this is the thing I was gonna, this to me really kind of gave it some extra points. This movie finishes pretty strong. Generally movies have a 3-act structure, and if you can finish strong, it leaves a good taste in your mouth. And yeah, I think this movie was good and you know, watchable, but I feel it stuck the landing in that 3rd act, because it kind of goes above and beyond. Things are revealed, plot twists are kind of revealed, and we see some quite explicit stuff, or a lot of it is implied. For example, we have a torture device, which is a kind of an expanding kind of prong that is shoved up someone's arse and, you know, expanded. Harsh. I mean, obviously it's not showing you that in because it would just be banned, but it's implied where you see it happening kind of somewhat kind of obscured, if you know what I mean, but like, it's happening to a character in the movie, and thinking, ooh, that is some harsh things. But they are, you know, this movie has some fairly kind of extreme ideas, albeit, you know, it's not necessarily, you'll see a lot of it explicitly shown on the screen, but there is a reasonable amount of kind of gory effects, and as I said, that last act has a lot of them. It kind of stays there. There's some really great imagery in regards to some supernatural kind of like beings that you'll kind of see, which I thought was good. And like I've said, the reveal I think is good about what's kind of actually going on. And then the final thing I would say about that kind of last act, it has this interesting kind of message, which I don't know if was intentional. And it's like, if you can't do it the right way, cheat. Is kind of the message, which I thought was, that's kind of an interesting message. And yeah, maybe it wasn't intentional, but I felt like it was like, oh, that's pretty interesting. I will say, I mean, one other thing I will say about this movie that I did like, the movie's kind of threat, if you like, for our protagonists throughout the movie is ever increasing, because you think, you know, it starts off with obviously the setup of these 2 murdered princes, and as the movie progresses, our 2 protagonists, this priest and this medium, seem to get themselves in more and more hot water, and their situation seems more and more dire as the film progresses, culminating in what I think is, as I say, in a very kind of strong kind of 3rd act. So yeah, so pretty good. So what doesn't work? Okay, then let me get the big thing out of the way. This is the one thing I think really hamstrings this movie, and that is, although I think the acting from our 2 main leads is passable to good, you know, some of the other performances unfortunately are on the weaker side. As much as I would say some of them comes across like they're in a pantomime. Charlie Steele, like a lot of these kind of low budget indie filmmakers, tends to reuse actors from different projects that he has a relationship with, and although I can, you know, think loyalty is a great, you know, asset to people, sometimes I think it holds filmmakers like this back because they feel that they have to use particular actors because they have a pre-existing relationship. And I think some of these actors, and I'm not going to point out who, unfortunately their acting is really quite hammy, to be honest with you, and it kind of just goes across as like I say, like a pantomime. What else? This movie looks cheap in regards to a lot of its kind of set design. There's a sequence in this kind of like this king's bedroom, for example. It looks incredibly cheap. The set looks, cheap. I think the cinematography is not particularly good, if I'm honest. I think some of the lighting choices here doesn't help with the cheap look, to be honest. It kind of feels like the lighting choices that are made don't feel like lighting that would be true of that particular kind of time period, giving it this kind of fakeness feeling to it and kind of a cheapness feel to it. But just the general, I would say, the movie does struggle under the weight of its kind of lower budget. Now, I'm a little bit forgiving with things like that because I think the story does have an interesting forward momentum, and I'm a little forgiving with lower budget movies, and I think it does a pretty good job of an approximation of a medieval horror movie. Obviously, again, it's clearly not the Tower of London. It doesn't really look like anything like it, to be honest. But yeah, it just looks a little cheap here and there, unfortunately. But if you're like me, and if you watch this channel, I suspect a lot of you maybe, you don't mind lower budget movies. And I will say, if you can be a little bit forgiving with some of the cheapness of this movie, I think you'll be rewarded with quite a satisfying horror movie, which really does, I think, stick the landing in that third act, where a hell of a lot happens, and it's pretty graphic, and I kind of quite like some of the character moments in there. So to me, that does elevate this movie to a fairly good 7 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.